Hi, I'm Shainti, back with another episode of Shainti Finance. Since July, I have been working on my mixed media painting series based on zodiac themes, and this month's theme is Aquarius. So let me get started with the painting. I'm first taking my oil pastel white stick and kind of creating a line on top of the galaxy star, kind of outlining the stars for the Aquarius sign. And this is I'm doing to create a resist before I start putting on my watercolors. It works the same way as it would work if you would put masking fluid on that area. This is not mandatory, but it helps in keeping those lines intact. Next, I'm starting with watercolors. I first wetted the area of the sky and I'm putting in colors. I'm using the colors crimson and various shades of violet that I'm getting by adding cobalt blue to the crimson, and I'm adding a lot of blue too. There is no general rule like where you need to put what color because this is kind of like an abstract galaxy looking sky. However, I like to put the darks on the edges and sides and keep the middle areas a little bit lighter, but that is a general theme, and I don't even have to be exact or work a lot on the blending in these areas because I'll go over all of these areas with oil pastels. So what I'm doing exactly here is creating a guide map with the colors with watercolor. And of course, since this is watercolor paper, I am with that watercolor, the white of the paper is completely covered. So when I start working with my oil pastels, I can just focus on getting the colors vibrant and adding the tones and adjusting values and contrast rather than trying to push in a lot of pigment to fill in the white of the paper. So that's the advantage of doing the work this time. Next, I added a little bit of outline of hills in the background, and I don't have to be very precise on that because it's in a distance, and I also added a hint of tree line at the foothills of the mountain. Next, I'm wetting the water area beneath the mountain and the horizon line and putting in blues in there. And in this water area, I'm going to be very sketchy. I'm going to make it very streaky, like put in lines. And because I put a lot of water before I started putting in the paints, some of those lines will blend out, some of those will stay. It really does not matter. Like I said, I'm just creating a guide map of the colors with my watercolors here, and I'll go over the entire painting with oil pastels. So being exact is not the key, just creating a guide map of where I want to put what color and how dark or light I want to go in different areas is what I am working on currently. So you will see me putting a lot of violets and blues, kind of reflecting the same colors I have put in the sky because obviously the water will reflect the sky. However, because it's kind of like a nighttime scene, I'm keeping it pretty dark, although I'm leaving a lot of areas very light because because of the ripples in the water, there will be a lot of shiny areas which would be pretty light colored, so the streaky effect will eventually work out wonderfully when I start working with my oil pastels. Like I said, no need to be exact when you're working like this, and this is a technique that you might find very interesting if you are doing landscapes. You might completely omit the human figure and just do the landscape, and it works beautifully. You can add a moon in the sky instead of the Aquarius sign in the sky. You can add a boat in the water, and there is like infinite number of possibilities how you can turn this painting into various different directions. What I am trying to show you is how I am doing my process of painting. Now I started with the skin, and with the skin generally what I'm doing is I'm wetting a certain area of the hands and body, and I'm first putting in the darkest area, and then I'm filling out with the lighter area. Although this is watercolors and you don't go from dark to light, I like to wet the entire surface with a very light color and then work with from dark to light. That ways I can lift off the darks and create values more easily. I'm still working on the body area, and this body may feel a little bit too dark than a human skin usually is. That is because I want to show that this is a night scene, and that's why there would be a lot of dark shadows, and thus the body is probably a little bit darker than it would be in a morning scene. So for my darks, I'm using purple or blue or very dark browns, and I'm working with the Holbein watercolors, and it's the basic 18 piece color set. Not a lot of colors, but mixing them with one another you can get like 1000 different color schemes. So it is a limited palette, but it doesn't remain limited when you start mixing colors. Again, on the other hand, I did the same thing, a very light base layer and then working from the darks to the lights. And you will see that I'm not working on in a great detail once again on the skin and the body as well, because in the entire painting I will be going over with oil pastels. The whole watercolor part was kind of like an hour or so, not more than that, because I want to focus more on the oil pastels. The watercolor is just a guide map once again, and it just helps me to adjust the values and make sure what colors I want in what areas, and then I can always finish the details and adjust everything with my oil pastels. I added a water pot because Aquarius is a sign of water bearer, and that's what I'm going for. And then I started working on the hair. I am adding different shades of blue, black, adding a lot of black and brown for the hair. I'll also add a little bit of purple, but it probably wouldn't be visible because I'm letting all the colors blend in with one another, not trying to create any straight lines over here. Next, I'm working in the cloth area. I am thinking that this is like a wet cloth, wet white cloth, but white, when you paint it or draw it, it's never white. There is a lot of colors because it will reflect the color of the surrounding areas, and since this is a night scene, I am letting it reflect the colors of purple and blue that is in the surrounding areas. Now I'm starting to work on my oil pastels, and first thing I'll do is make the stars prominent. So I put a little bit of yellow on the stars, and then I'm putting a lot of white on top of the yellow, and then I'm using my clay sculpting tool and blending that out and pushing it back. So what this tool does is it helps blending, and it also helps to push the pigment back into the paper so that you get a very smooth end result. Now I'm working with my pink colors, and you will see now that I will work with various different colors that I've already put in the background with watercolors. What I'm doing is now I'm using my oil pastel sticks and enhancing those colors, and in some areas I'll go over not with the exact shade of color and vary it with different other shades. And it does not matter, like I said, the color really does not matter. I just wanted to create a value map previously, and now I am just going over those colors with area of different colors, starting from pink to crimson to different shades of mauves and violets, up to the darker blues and indigos, and even a little bit of black on the edges. But be very careful when you're applying black, because black is a pretty dulling and pretty opaque color. Once you put it in one area, it automatically attracts attention in those areas. So if you have a lot of black, that area will become very prominent. So be careful when you're putting in black. I would advise not to put too much black unless you are going to glaze colors over it. So at this point it looks very scratchy, but I will add a lot of more pigments of other different colors for it to blend naturally, and then I'll come back with my clay sculpting tool. I use those as a blending tool. Currently those are my favorite tools to blend with as far as oil pastels are concerned. They almost work like a magic, and blend it to the background. They push for the initial layer, I use the clay sculpting tools just to push the pigments back onto the paper so that they kind of create an even surface. On the next layers, once I have an even layer of oil pastel all over it, I adjust the colors with much more detail. I adjust the values. I'll add in some kind of impression of clouds in the sky, although I do not want it to be very, very detailed, because it can take away the attention from my main woman character, the Aquarius character. But I still want a very colorful galaxy background, staying true to the other paintings of the series. And anyways, I like these colorful, bright galaxies. That is one of the reasons I like to work with oil pastels mixed with watercolor, because it just gives the best of both medium. It brings the blendings and coverage that watercolor gets so easily, and then it gets the vibrancy that oil pastels provide. So I'm still working on the very first layer of oil pastel, and you will see that as I'm going over the areas of where I added pigments with my pastel tool, it's automatically smoothing out and getting back on that surface, and thus you're prepping the surface for the next layers. I'm working on the mountains now. I want the mountains to be kind of a grayish mauve color because it's very back in the distance. I do not want a lot of detail or a lot of color on the mountains. I want it to be kind of just an outline of the mountains. Next, I'll put a hint of trees at the foothill of the mountains, or hills, or whatever you want to call them. And I'm working with two different shades of blue here. One is an indigo blue, which is almost like black, and the other is a little bit lighter than that. It's more like a teal indigo combination of blue. And I'm working with my Holbein oil pastels here. I have a 40-piece set, and that allows me a lot of colors. I am using my clay shaper tools to push a little bit of those tree elements upwards and create a little bit of detail to show that they are trees. It's just a hint. I don't want a great big details because they are way far away. Next, I'm starting working on the water. I created a horizon line first with a thin line of gray, and then adding a thin, very thin, as thin as possible line of white on top of it. Now I'm adding the darker blues and indigos and purples all over the water surface. I'm more or less following the same guide map as I have created with my watercolors, but when putting the watercolors and once they dried, I realized that the sides need to be a little bit darker and some of the edges need to be a little bit darker. So in some of the areas I'll darken it when I'm adding my oil pastels much more than it was with only the watercolors. And that, like I said, that is the reason I do watercolors first, because not only that it covers the entire white of the canvas and I don't have to fight with the white of the canvas, and it also gives me a very good idea of how the lights and darks in different areas are placed, whether they are working or not, and all I need to do is brighten up and adjust with oil pastels. Makes our job a lot easier. Typically I spend a little bit quite a bit of time pushing in the pigments with my blending tool, but in this case, since I'm painting water, I'm not going to do a lot of even blending. I want it to look a little bit scratchy because that would hint the sparkle of reflections of stars and light in the water. Water by nature, because of the rippling effect, kind of has a sparkling effect, and just leaving some of the white or the lighter background to show through helps in doing that, like automatically. It makes your life a lot easier that way. I'm back onto the Aquarius sign in the sky, the stars, and I'm adding a little bit more pigment around the stars to give the stars a little prominence. And once I add more pigment, I'll also go back with my clay sculpting tool and push those pigments back so that they are a smooth layer. Yeah, I'm a little bit crazy about smoothing everything, but that is not really required. If you want a more looser style, a more impressionistic effect, I think oil pastels are wonderful for that. In fact, a lot of people, when they work with oil pastels, they like the effect of a kind of a looser style, the streaky impressionistic look that oil pastels render so naturally. But I go for a little bit more realistic look, so I prefer that. It's just a personal preference and nothing. I love impressionism as much as I love realism, but when it comes to me doing it, I tend to do a little bit more realistic than impressionistic. Like I said, it's just my personal preference, nothing against any particular style. I like different styles of art. It's just that when I'm coming to doing it myself, I'm better at some styles than the other. Onto the body, I'm doing the exact same thing that I did with the watercolors, only I'm using oil pastels this time. So I first put the darker shadows with blue and purple and very dark Van Dyke brown, and then I came back with a lighter shade of brown and ochre and a little bit of skin tone flesh tint color, and then I am using my clay shaper tools to blend them all in. Once the dark base layer of the skin is set in, I am going back to my flesh tint and creating a lot of highlights. Although this is a night scene, I want to create a lot of highlights around the body to give it a bright contrast, just like as if the light of the glowing stars is reflecting off her body. You have to use a little bit of imagination here. It's not really a real thing. If it had been a completely night scene, it probably would not have so much of bright highlights, but I like it this way. Just add a little bit of visual imaginary elements, and that makes the painting look a bit surreal, because surreal is the look I'm going for here. Onto the watering pot, just like I did with my watercolors, I'll put in a lot of darks first, and for the darks I'm using shades of very dark brown, the Van Dyke brown, and then I'm also using a chocolatey colored brown. I don't exactly know the name of the color. And then I'll come with a lighter shade of brown, kind of like the burnt sienna, and I'll also use a bit of yellow here and there for the lighter areas. For the final highlights, once I have blended all of these colors together, I'll put in a lot more bright yellows and let them stand out a little bit, not blend them all together. And I'll also add a little bit of flesh tint here and there for the sparkling highlights. Just like on the edge of the hands and the body, I had very bright highlights. I'm going to add the same kind of highlights in the water vessel as well. I'm also adding a lot more shadows on the left hand side of the watering pot, and I'm using my indigo blue mostly for those very dark shadows underneath the pot and on the left side of the pot, and also blending those a lot because I don't want these colors to stand out. The only thing that I would leave unblended at the very end is the very bright highlights. Everything else gets blended and smoothed out. That's how I work. Onto the hair next, just the same thing. I am first putting in my darks, which is indigo blue, a lighter shade of blue, a little bit of purple, a lot of Van Dyke brown, and the chocolatey brown for lack of the right terminology. And then I'm coming back with my flesh tint and adding some highlights. Now in the first layer I will blend everything in, and a lot of those highlights will be lost, which is fine because I'm just trying to create a dark to light gradual variation. I'll come back with my white and lighter colors once again and add more highlights, and some of these highlights I will leave it just like that, a little bit scratchy, a little bit unrefined, because that's the look I'm going for. Onto the white dress, or what I should call it, cloth attire of the woman. I'm actually using a lot of blues and grays and even a little bit of browns for the cloth, and because it's also wet, the bottom part is kind of even more dark than the rest of the areas. And the darker areas I'm using a lot of blues and browns to make it like really dark, and then I'll later come back with a lot of white for highlights. But remember, this is a night scene, so the white would vary in the white I'll only use for highlighting. The rest of the areas I'll keep it pretty dark with my blues, grays, browns. Now I'm adding some whites and grays in the water in between the ripples. Once I add the whites and lights with white and gray, I will go in between and add some dark striations as well. That will create the contrast between the lighter ripple sparkles and the darker areas of water and give it a more natural look. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to go for a lot of dark colors in the edges and sides of the painting. That ways the darks and the lights create a contrast and helps the viewer to focus on the main object, which in this case is a figure. But if you had put, like, if you had were going for like a landscape only or a boat or something, you will have to change that a little bit here and there. Now I'm adding some more color to the sky and I'll blend it out too. And with that, we're pretty much coming to the end of the painting. I hope you're liking the entire painting series. If you have not caught the previous paintings already, I've linked all of them in the video description below, as well as all the materials that I've used in this painting. So check the video description part out. If you like the painting, give me a thumbs up. That means a lot to me. If you can leave me a comment, I would really appreciate that. That motivates me a lot, and I'd like to know your thoughts as well. And that is all about this painting. And if you're not already subscribed to my channel, consider subscribing, because I post at least 2 new videos on every Wednesday and Friday. So I'll see you soon. Thank you.